Finally, Ukraine's Western partners are recovering from their fear of the Kremlin's red lines. Now Russia and its military escalation are no longer feared. I will tell you why. Previously, the US refused to supply Ukraine with new weapons for a reason, and it did so on the basis of the science called managing the risk of war escalation. Now it turns out that the science in the case of war with the Russian army is dubious, and more reminiscent of Washington's fear of Moscow's perceived aggressiveness. The Biden administration will now focus more on Kyiv's demands than on the Kremlin's hysteria. A detailed psychoanalysis of the White House was conducted by the Washington Post. The publication describes how the United States has evolved from providing Ukraine with Javelin anti-tank weapons to artillery and F-16 fighter jets. The key explanation is very simple. Before, the White House was frightened to the point of hiccups by red lines from Putin. Only now the White House has realized that all these scares exist only on the tip of the Russian president's tongue, and that he himself is not a military commander, but rather a master of the conversational genre. Here are a few quotes. Every time the White House administration has delayed sending aid to Ukraine, for fear of Russian escalation, it has been completely and utterly wrong. Republicans have said that the threat of Russian escalation should not even be considered now. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall called the administration cowardly for not sending tactical ATACMS missile systems. Now even White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who until recently had been an advocate of reconciliation with Moscow, believes that the benefits of supplying more lethal weapons to Ukraine outweigh the risks of escalation. He has also worked extensively with European allies to provide Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets. At the beginning of Russia's invasion last February, Putin threatened that any country that would try to obstruct his forces should know, Russia's response would be immediate, and would lead to consequences like you have never seen in history. As we see now, indeed, we have never seen anything like this in history. No one considers these red lines of Putin and Medvedev's threats to strike Ukraine, Poland, United Kingdom, and of course the United States with nuclear weapons anymore. But at the beginning of a full-scale invasion, the US establishment tried to allocate weapons to Ukraine, looking back on these threats. The White House administration believed, and juggled these concerns amid activism from Ukrainians and hawks in Congress, who sought to encourage Biden to move faster by sending modern weapons to the Ukrainians. But in fact, the Kremlin has swallowed the violation of all lines. The US believes that Putin is afraid to strike NATO because the Russian army has suffered heavy losses and is no longer as combat-ready as it seemed before the full-scale war. It took more than a year for Ukraine's partners to figure out Putin's main bluff, and now they are helping Ukraine without expecting much consequences from the Kremlin. If this epiphany had come to them 12 months ago, the war would have long since ended with Ukraine's victory. But the good news is that today Kyiv is already defining red lines, and they are getting closer and closer to the Kremlin, F-16s, ATACMS. What other expectations were there for the Ukrainian armed forces? Blinken's wonderful phrase puts everything in its place, and it will go into the history books of this war. Many are convinced that the Russian army is second in the world. But it is second in Ukraine. Thank you for watching the video to the end. See you tomorrow.